proposed operational referendum for the Ripon Area School District, a referendum question that could be on the ballot here in November. So I'm Mary Whitrock, Superintendent here in Ripon, and I'm going to turn this over to Jonah Adams, our business manager for the School District of Ripon, so that he can go through and provide some information, and then we'll open up for any questions at the end. All right.
Thank you for viewing this video of our referendum discussion as we consider asking the school board to consider a referendum and having voters decide on a referendum question. So the referendum, if it goes to voters, it has kind of two goals, two reasons why we might go to referendum. The first reason is to improve student achievement, and the district currently faces a significant loss of federal revenue that will begin in the 2023-2024 school year. Roughly $1.4 million is what we're expecting to spend this year. The loss of that revenue will mean larger class sizes and fewer interventionists for students. A referendum would help maintain some of the district's interventions and lessen the increase in student-teacher ratios. So this, the first reason why we would do this is to obviously have an impact on our students and a positive impact on our students and our schools. And additionally, if the referendum started this school year, we would have it would multiply itself as far as the positive effect that it would have, because it would allow us to push some federal revenue into next year as well. When we look at student achievement, we looked at 26 nearby school districts, and these districts were chosen just by taking the map and zooming out until we had a big sample size, or a big enough sample size. So we looked at 26 nearby districts that are close to us, and of those 26 districts, Ripon ranks third in student achievement. So that's something that we wanted to celebrate. Our average student in Ripon achieves 22.4% higher on statewide testing than the statewide average score, and so that was something that we wanted to celebrate. So we know that students in Ripon are doing very good things in the classroom, and we want that to continue through this time of COVID recovery and the learning loss that may have happened from COVID and the closure of schools and so on that's happening across the nation. The second goal of the referendum would be to be somewhat conservative and maintain the property tax rate where it's at now. So the second goal is to maintain the district property tax rate for the school district property tax rate. The proposed tax levy increase as part of this proposal would be $0, a $0 increase in the rate. The new operational referendum would bring new revenue to the school district, and we keep the mill rate flat at where it's at right now at $8.27 per $1,000 of property value. This is equivalent to $827 per $100,000 of property value. And so there's two reasons that this is possible. So the biggest thing is that we have new property that's going to come online from the city of Ripon with the closure of TID District number 4. And so the TID District number 4 was closed in January or February of 2022, and the school district found out about it in April or May. And so this is a lot of property value that's going to come online to the school district. If we maintain our current property tax rates, we can spread some additional levy amounts onto this new property and hold our current tax rate flat. This is also partially possible by shifting $150,000 debt defeasance. This is an additional levy that's done in our long-term debt fund that is meant to help us pay off debt early. And so by not doing that, by not levying more to pay off debt early, we can take $150,000 that's been going toward that, and we can instead put it toward operational funding, which is going to benefit our school district more. We wanted to look at where we're at with those same 26 school districts geographically that are so close to us. And when we look at those same 26 school districts, we see that we are 14th in our mill rate as far as where we rank of the 26. We are below the state average, 4.3% lower than the state average. The statewide average mill rate is $8.64, and we're at $8.27. And so we are below the state average, and we're below the average of our local districts. And if we look historically, I realize my slide got messed up here a little bit. If we look historically, we're at an all-time low. In the last 40 years, this is the lowest that we've been for our mill rate. We're at $8.27. The school board can hold the mill rate flat for next year and just take advantage of this increased property value if we can, if the district does pass the referendum. And so anyways, we're 33% lower than in 2014, and we are 57% lower than in 1992 as far as our mill rate. So if the school district can hold the mill rate flat here, this is the best place to hold the mill rate in the past 40 years in terms of the total levy rate. Okay, so we looked at student achievement, we looked at mill rate, and we also wanted to look at just operating expenses. There's a website called ClearGov that maintains a database of local governments. And so for the school district, of those 26 nearby districts, Ripon ranks 25th in spending operating expenses per pupil. Our operating expenses per pupil were $10,447, which is 21.8% lower than the average of these 26 districts. So we have a pretty good story to tell as far as where our student achievement is, where our mill rate is, and where our current operating expenses are. The reason our operating expenses are so much lower than some of these other districts is that we don't have as much revenue per pupil, so we don't have as much of an expense per pupil. And some of those revenue limits were determined back in 1993 when the state created the revenue limits based somewhat on how much the district was spending at that time before the revenue limits were put in place. And so we are still affected by that. We're also affected by a freeze in per pupil revenue at the state and local level, which we'll talk about. Okay, so when we look at our revenue, what might happen in the future, and what's going to happen in this coming school year, the 2022-2023 school year, we looked at kind of the top of our revenue, some of the things that happened with some of our secondary revenue, I guess is how you might call it. These are some of our revenue growth from our state and local revenue, and it includes some of our charter grants. It includes some savings that we think we're going to be able to create through Fund 46. But if we look at what the red bars are ESSER federal grants. And so last school year, the school year that just ended, 21-22 school year, we spent about $1.1 million of federal ESSER funds just for our operations to keep things running. And this coming school year, 2022-23, we're expecting to spend $1.4 million. When the ESSER funds are gone, there's going to be a sharp drop in revenue, so there'll be a loss of revenue. We know on this chart, we're trying to predict what the state will do in per pupil increases. And so we know that it's been flat for 3 years, what the state has given us, but we expect that in 23-24 there will be an increase. Based on what we've been hearing from legislators, we don't believe that it's going to be dramatically more than it has been in the past. And so we tried to predict, based on what's happened in the past, what might happen in the future. So we expect some modest increases in per pupil revenue, and we expect that it will grow over time. But there will be just a very sharp loss of revenue with the loss of the federal dollars. And so we're going to talk about a second scenario. But first we're going to talk a little bit more about how the ESSER funds have been spent in the district. So we have lowered classroom sizes by adding elementary classroom teachers. We've added special education teachers. We've added reading interventionists, special education aides, school counselors, nurses, and Spanish teacher, behavior interventionists. We've added all these positions to help students who may be suffering from learning loss or may be suffering from social emotional needs because of isolation from COVID and some sort of some loss that's happened from dealing with the national pandemic. And so anyways, these are how the funds have been used in Ripon. So over 3 years, we received approximately $2.7 million for federal ESSER funds, which was meant to help schools recover from COVID and to reach students who were learning remotely and so on. Okay, so this is kind of our second scenario, assuming that a referendum would pass. And in the second scenario, we would expect that by holding the mill rate flat, but having quite a bit more property to levy against, we could potentially receive $545,000 of referendum funding and hold the mill rate flat. Whatever the amount turns out to be is what we will levy. If this is approved, we would not exceed, we would not raise the mill rate. That's what we would promise to do for next school year. We would try to hold that mill rate flat. But we think that it might equal $545,000 in operating revenue from the referendum. If that happened, it would have an effect on 2 school years. And so for this coming school year, it would reduce our federal ESSER grant spending from $1.4 million to about $900,000, and would help us save some of that federal ESSER money for the following year. So it really has an effect on multiple years, helping us with additional revenue. We would keep in 2022-23, we would keep the same staffing plan and the same spending plan. So it would actually cost the same amount, but it allows us to push federal revenue into the 2023-2024 school year. And if you notice, the other effect that it has, the other positive effect that a referendum might have, is it allows us to not have a super sharp drop in revenue. We do need to right-size district spending to match our revenue, to have a balanced budget, but it's not nearly as much of a sharp drop in revenue as there would be without a referendum. And so you can kind of see what we expect would happen with revenue all the way through the 2027 to 2028 school year. It kind of levels it off, which is something that would benefit our school operations. Okay, so this chart shows the difference between those 2 scenarios. The gray bars are assuming that this is our current plan. The gray bars are kind of our current plan. To have a balanced budget, we need to make sharp cuts. We're expecting sharp cuts in revenue, so we're going to have to make sharp cuts in expenses. The blue bars are showing what would happen with the referendum passing. And so here you can see it's a dramatic difference in the 2023-2024 school year. It's more than $1 million difference in our budget for our revenue and our expenses, what would happen in the 2023-2024 school year. And it has a major difference in all of the upcoming years that the referendum would apply to if it was approved. But especially the 2023-2024 school year. So the timing of this referendum, we have this year is the first year that TID district is coming online to the school district. So the timing of it is, if we want to hold the mill rate flat, we can benefit us by holding the mill rate where it's at $8.27. It'll benefit us by allowing us to push some federal dollars into the following school year, and it helps our overall budget by just kind of leveling off revenue and making the reductions a little bit more bearable as far as what needs to be cut from the district budget in order to have a balanced budget. The other reason why the timing is important is looking kind of what's happened with our local revenue limits. The revenue limits control local property taxes, and it includes a portion that's paid for by the state general equalization aid. And the combination of the state aid and local property taxes makes up our revenue limit. And what we've had is 3 years where we're going to have 2 years where we have no increases in the per pupil revenue. So it's been frozen at the state and local level. Yes, we have additional federal dollars, but at the state and local level, we have been frozen with the per pupil revenue that we've had. And so you can see here the flat line, these are actual per pupil increases. And so we do normally expect to see a per pupil increase that allows us to pay inflationary increases to all of our vendors and to our staff. And so anyways, here we've had a freeze at the state and local level. And then we assume we're making projections that the trend line will continue as it has, what the state has done in the past, that we will expect in the future to see per pupil increases in revenue. But if they increase only at the same way that they were before, you kind of create a gap. Your federal revenue is gone, and now you're only increasing after 2 years of a freeze at the same rate that you were under a hypothetical scenario. And so you create this gap between what would have been and what is. And so we expect that that gap between where we will be after 2 years of a freeze and where we would have been if the per pupil increases had increased at the same rate would be a gap of about $250,000 per year going forward. Kind of a permanent gap. And so a referendum at the local level can help us close that gap, bring us to where we would have been for the 2023-2024 school year had there not been a revenue limit freeze. And also keep the mill rate flat so that the local taxpayer doesn't pay any more on their property, assuming that they don't have a new assessment or something on their property that would change that. But trying to hold the mill rate at an all-time low. So those are the main charts that we've had. We talked about how our student achievement in Ripon is quite high. We talked about how our mill rate is at an all-time low. Our spending is low for our area. We have an opportunity to hold that mill rate flat and provide the local schools with additional revenue to maintain some of the support positions, classroom teachers, behavior interventionists, reading interventionists that we've added. And we think that it's maybe a great decision for students, but we're going to ask voters to make that choice in November at the regular elections in November. Voters will get a chance to weigh in on this and tell us and decide what should happen with this referendum. Does anybody have any questions about the presentation or any points that you want clarified?
Is the mill rate just the school, or are there other components of that?
Okay, so this is a good question. We want to talk about this a little bit. If we cannot promise that local property tax rates will remain where they've been, because we are a portion of the taxes that local taxpayers pay. We only are talking about the school district portion of taxes. We are not talking about the county, the technical college, or the community that you live in, whether that's a city or a village. We're not talking about those taxes that are raised at the local level either. So we are only talking about the school district tax rates. So we can't make promises about that your taxes will not go up or that your rate will not go up. And if you received an assessment, that would be another reason that your tax rate may go up if your home was or your property was reassessed. That would also have an impact on the taxes that you pay. So
you need to look at some individual variables.
yeah.
Yeah. Other questions?
Gary?
Jonah, at what point will you have an idea about what the per pupil funding will be for the following school year?
That's a good
Will it
question.
be before the referendum or after the referendum, for example?
Okay, so we are going to ask the referendum question in November, and that's going to be, that referendum question, if it passed, would apply to the 2022-2023 school year. And we already know what the revenue is going to be for that school year. We already know that it's frozen. There is no increase in per pupil aid. There is no increase in the low revenue limit ceiling or in the amount that's paid as categorical aid per student. So we know what the revenue is going to be for 2022-2023, and we know the per pupil revenue is not going up, it's frozen. So beyond that, for the 2023-2024 school year, that's the beginning of a new biennial budget, and so that we do not know. And unfortunately, sometimes that has not been decided until the school year has already begun. It depends on what happened. Last time it was decided in July, but
If
we'll
it
find out.
was like that again, it could be over a year before we know, or as late as a year from October. So it is always out there.
So that's another reason to ask
Yes.
Yeah.
the district community to take action.
Yes, that's another great reason, because we don't know what is coming, and we need to be prepared to have a balanced budget and to try to maintain as many supports for students as we can within our budget. So.
I guess I think it's on a past slide, but just to kind of clarify, like the referendum will be in November 2022, and that will impact the 22-23 budget, which will then let you guys push the ESSER funds into 23-24.
And we can do that one more year with those ESSER funds.
Okay.
And the reason without the referendum, the reason that we would keep the ESSER funds in next year's budget is because we're already staffed for next year. And obviously, the sooner we get resources to students and close that gap, the better off we are. But you're right, that one slide showed that with the referendum, we'd be able to provide those supports to our students for a third year, which would make a significant impact on closing the gap and addressing the social emotional needs post-COVID as well. It's a great question.
And then just kind of, I guess, are you guys working on the wording right now? And is the wording of the question going to make it clear to voters that it won't impact the district's portion of the tax rate?
Yeah, right now the board is surveying the community to see kind of the level of interest, and part of the survey is just helping clarify the situation as well. So it's to provide some learning as well as gain that feedback, and that will help to drive what the actual question will look like. We will know more about property values in August, when the board would have to actually select the specific wording for the question. And then, assuming the board decides to go forward and put something on the ballot, we would have then all of September and October to really communicate clearly with the community what the exact question is, the exact amount, and then again, it's that zero impact on the school tax rate.
And if the property rates, because we don't know exactly how the property growth will be, we get a very good estimate in August, but it's not exact. It's always been off by a little less than 0.5%, but it makes a difference. And so in order to make it exactly 827, we would have a referendum question probably that would state a number, and that would give the school board the authority to levy up to that number, but we would only levy up to the amount that would give the 827 flat mill rate. So you'd have maybe more authority to levy additional, but we would hold it at the 827 mill rate. So because when the question is passed, the property rates will still not be exact. So.
I don't know if you want to just speak a little bit to that the district operates within a revenue limit, and there's two things that make up the funding for that dollar amount. It's state and local taxes, but it's our aid. So even if aid goes up, that just impacts the tax that people would pay. I don't know if you want to talk about that
Yeah.
just a little bit, because sometimes that's confusing, and it sounds like if our state aid is going up, maybe
Yeah.
we're good.
Yeah. So the revenue limit, it's really made up of those two pieces. You have your local property taxes and you have your general state aids. And in Ripon, I'm just gonna throw out ballpark numbers. We have let's say 16 million in state funding and then about 4 million in local funding. And so that's roughly how, just very rough numbers, but it kind of gives you an idea. And so we received about $400,000 more in state aid this school year, the last one that just ended, 21-22 school year. We received about $400,000 more in state aid, but it didn't give us even $1 more in terms of per pupil aid, or there was no, we actually received less revenue under the revenue limit because we have a slightly declining enrollment. So we received no additional revenue from that, but what that general equalization aid does is it acts as property tax relief. And so as that aid increases underneath that revenue limit, the amount that's paid by local taxpayers decreases. So as the general aid that we received was $400,000 more than the prior year, and so local taxes decreased to about $400,000 as well. So it's a very good thing for local taxpayers, but in terms of operating the school district, it does not provide additional revenue.
So just important to know, if you hear that we have more aid in the district, it means that that's aid to the property taxpayers so that they pay less. It's not additional funding. And that's just really important, because we've had that conversation multiple times, and it can be confusing if you're not sure what it means. Any other questions?
Gary?
If the voters have questions, what is the best way for them to get them answered? That you
I think
recommend?
a couple of different things that they can do. We have a number of frequently asked questions that are right on the district website. They can go there, search operational referendum, they'll go to that webpage. Some questions are already answered there that we've received. And so we'll continue to update that FAQ section. This presentation will be there so that voters are able to look for some of that basic information. Just calling the main district number, and we can get them, if they want information on how to contact board members, that's all on our website. But they can certainly call the district office and give us an idea of what they're looking for, who they may want to speak to, and we can get them that information as well. Because we really, truly want to engage the community in a conversation that gives the board the best information possible to know whether or not to go forward. So. Awesome. If there's no further questions, thanks for joining us, and be sure to look at the website and stay informed about what's coming. And I know our local newspaper is going to be providing some coverage as well as the cable channels. So thank you.
Thank you.